Chap- Chapter 7, Halacha 6, in Yesodei Hatorah, we're in the throes of the subject of Neviut and what makes a prophet, and how do we know what level he's on, and how is prophecy given to him. So we spoke about, up until now, the run-of-the-mill prophet who gets a nevuah, and if you remember, the Rambam says he's got to meditate and he's got to concentrate, and everything has to go right. And then he gets, bam, the nevuah. We're going to contrast that with Moshe, because everything we've been saying up until now is regarding all the rest of the Nevi'im, and who could forget the Neviot. But when it comes to Moshe, there are different rules, okay? And we should know that because it's written specifically in the Torah that way. So here he starts. He's going to talk about Moshe Rabbeinu. Kol advarim shamarnu hem derech nevuah l'chol hanavim harishonim v'achronim. Okay, everything we've been saying regarding how to get the nevuah and how you have to be destined and how you have to be in the right place at the right time and you have to accept it. That's all regarding the earlier Nevi'im and the later Nevi'im. Chutz Moshe Rabbeinu Rabban shall kol hanavim, as they say, the great granddaddy of them all. Right? If you remember Tom Jackson, the college football announcer, that's how he would describe the Rose Bowl, right? The granddaddy of them all. So that's what Moshe Rabbeinu was. So what exactly is the difference between Moshe and the rest of the Nevi'im? So now we're going to list 5 or 6 differences. So first of all, right, the way the Rambam says that you got the nevuah, you weren't in a conscious state. You were either like meditating, or you were in some kind of trance, right? Or you were in a dream, right? That's how the Nevi'im would get the nevuah. As opposed to Moshe Rabbeinu misnaba v'hu er v'omed. Moshe Rabbeinu is standing. Okay, he's not in a trance, he is conscious. Shenemar ubavo Moshe lo hamoed lo daber ito v'yishmas hakol mi daber elav. This is a pasuk we're going to learn very soon on the 8th day of Hanukkah, in 6 days from now. We're going to learn that pasuk, which is the last pasuk in Naso, which leads up to Bahaloscha. Okay, it says that Moshe Rabbeinu would hear the voice, would literally communicate with God. Okay, it's an interesting word, that word midaber. There's only 3 or 4 of those kind of words in the Torah. It's not midaber, it's midaber. Okay, we'll talk about that some other time. Kol hanevi'im al yedei malach. Okay, the rest of the Nevi'im, how would they get their prophecy? They would get it through a malach. Lefichach ro'en ma shehem ro'im b'mashal b'chida. So therefore, it was kind of brought to these Nevi'im, right, through a messenger, right? And they would see it through what we called a riddle or a mashal or an image or something. But Moshe Rabbeinu lo al yedei malach, sounds like the Haggadah, shenemar pe'al pe'adaber bo. He spoke to God, right, without any intermediary. V'nemar v'diber Hashem al Moshe panim al panim. Right, that's in Kitisa. V'nemar, and it says utmunas Hashem yabit. Okay, the Rambam is going out of his way to bring 3 different proofs for his thesis that the nevuah that Moshe got and relayed was different than any other Navi that ever existed. And he brings 3, 4 different psukim that show the pattern. Klomar she'ein sham mashal el roa hadavar al buryav blochido blo mashal. Moshe gets the message clear without any help. No riddle, no mashal. It's all laid out. Hu Hatorah me'ida alav b'marev v'lo b'chidot. It even says it's flat out, right? That's the end of Parshas Bahaloscha, where Miriam gets in trouble, right? If you remember, She'eno misnaba b'chida ela b'mara shero hadava al buryo. He sees everything crystal clear, without any smoke and mirrors. Kol adivim yireim v'nifhalenu mismogegim. Interesting word. All the Nevi'im they have different, how should we say, they're trembling and they're frightened and they're quivering and they're, as we say, shaking in their boots, right? Because they're about to get Nevuah. So they're all nervous. Moshe, however, Rabbeinu is calm as a cucumber. Eino ken. Shakasu vomer kashay daber ishal re'ehu. Right? He spoke to God like people speak to their friends, like it's a nothing, right? It's just another day in the office. Klomar, Kamosha ein adam nival lishmua divrei chavero, just like no one's scared per se to talk to their friend, except if it's during laning. So too Moshe had the power to get this nevuah and to understand in a conscious state, clear-headed. Who omed al amdo shalem. Okay, he's like a regular day. Next, kol hanevim einin misnabin b'chol eis sheyirtzu. They just can't prophesize whenever they want to. Moshe Rabbeinu eino ken elo kol zman sheyachbo et ruach hakodesh lo vashto. He had an instant. Request. Nevuah right now, just hit this button. Okay, that's how it worked with Moshe. He doesn't have to prepare. He just has to hit the button and bam, start saying Nevius. He's standing there like a malach. Because he is ready all the time and doesn't need any special preparation, he could say Nevius whenever he wants. Right? Remember what the context is over there? That is the beginning of Pesach Sheni in Parshas Bahaloscha, right? Where the people said, "Hey Moshe, we got a problem. We're Tameh and we can't do Pesach Rishon." And there was no law yet of Pesach Sheni. So Moshe says, just give me a second. Right? He didn't have to go to the mikveh. He didn't have to go in this. He didn't have to go into a trance. He says, hang on. I'll tell you in a minute what the answer is. Right? That's the specific proof that the Rambam brings that Moshe was ready 24/7. Okay? He was always on call. And because of this aspect, that Moshe, on the positive side, was always on call and he could always perform nevuah. So therefore, when it came to the after Matan Torah, if you remember, the pasuk says Lechem or lehem shuva lachem lo halechem, a pasuk in Veschanan, which basically says that after Matan Torah, right, people weren't allowed to be with their spouses for 3 days before Matan Torah. After Matan Torah, okay, open season. Everyone could go home and resume life. There was only one person who couldn't resume life, and that was Moshe. Okay, that's what the Gemara in Shabbos, the famous Gemara, says one of the 3 things that Moshe did. Right, he was poresh min ha'isha. Okay, he separated himself from his wife, and it was somewhat controversial because he was a human being. He was mortal. Right, he wasn't a malach, and that is the whole precipitous for what Miriam got upset about. Right, he says, right, he was telling Tzipporah, hey, it's not fair. We all have lives, right? We all have husbands. We all have families, right? You're special. Now she meant it in a good way, but unfortunately, that's what brought her lashon hara and the tsaras and the whole story. But this is exactly what the Rambam is saying. Because Moshe was so holy, he was unrelatable, right, to the average human being, that he had special laws. right? We don't normally grant special laws to today for clergy. Maybe they could park by a hydrant. Other than that, you know, there's nothing special that a rabbi halachically has over a layman, right? It's the same halacha for everyone. The one, or I don't say one, but one of the very, very few exceptions when it came to Moshe was that he separated from his wife, and it cost him. Right? It wasn't simple. Okay, so that's exactly what the Rambam is referring to over here. Halamada chekol hanivim kishanevuah mistalekes mehen chozun laholam. A navi, he does his job. He says his nevuah. That's it. It's a 9 to 5 job. 5 o'clock, you go home, and right, you could enjoy the game with your kids. But says the Rambam, shehu tzarchei haguf. They could take care of what we call tzarchei haguf, kulam kishar ha'am, the regular people, after 5 o'clock. Lefichach ein parshin min sehem. They have no business separating themselves from their wives or family. Moshe Rabbeinu lo chazer la'olo harishon, lefichach perish min ha'isha la'olam. He never ever went back to Tzipora after Har Sinai. When he saw what he saw at Har Sinai, he became a quasi, I don't call him a malach, but he became on a different level, and he didn't go back to Tzipora. The nikshara daito litzur ha'olamim, and he became connected. Is a nice way of describing God. Tzur ha'olamim, v'lo nistalik ma'alav ha'hod la'olam. He had this glory. It's like once you experience, right, Har Sinai, he was a changed person forever. Okay, he had it attached to him, the Karan Or Panav, right? He even had, right, the Karan Or that he had, right? He had to wear a mask so people could, right, weren't blinded, or right. So, right, he was glowing, whatever that means. So he had the glow, right? Like you meet someone and you're beaming, right, from ear to ear, right? Sometimes you see people's faces. So Moshe had this forever. It was perpetual, right? He was a different person, right? V'karan arpana v'nikadesh kemalachim. Wow, and the Rambam ends off by saying that he became holy like an angel. All right. There's no class now, right? So I could do one more. Hanavi efshar shetihen nevuaso la'atzmo. It is possible, says the Rambam, that a Navi could give prophecy la'atzmo, for his own self, for his own sake. Bilvad lahachiv libo lahosiv daito. It's personal, right? To be marchiv his das, to expand his knowledge. Ad sheyeda mashalohaya yodea ma'osan advar magdolim. Right? To allow him to expand and to gain knowledge, right, that he never had before. The efshar sheyeshulach la'am ma'amei haaretz o la'an she'ir o ma'malcha l'chonen osan l'hodia mayasu, right? It's also possible that the nevuah is not for him, but rather it's to warn other people, right? The first thing that comes to mind, obviously, is Yonah, right? He was sent off to a foreign country, in his example to Nineveh, right, to go and to prophesize and to warn the people to be better, right? That's exactly what the Rambam is saying here. That's another option, right? So when they send the Navi, right, he comes off the plane and he says, I'm a Navi. So everyone's wondering, like, how do we believe him? How do we know he's not some, kook from LA, right, who starts, babbling, right? What is it that makes him different than anyone else? And this is the big problem historically when it came to Nevi'im, is how do you know who's true and who's not true, right? Because we know there's a concept of Navi Sheker, right? We learned about him in Sanhedrin. He's one of the people that's Chai of Skila, right? Someone who claims to be a real Navi and does a few magic tricks and, right, pulls a rabbit out of a hat and he says stuff, right? And all of a sudden, right, you have a Jim Jones, right? Part 2. So how do you know to believe someone? How do you know not to believe someone? So it's a very, very difficult concept. So the Rambam touches it just a little bit over here, and he says that the first step is that when he goes and he says his nevuah, nosen lo osu mofis, he has to do some kind of a trick. He either brings a sign or he does a magic trick, right? Just to introduce himself, right? He does like a 3-card Monte, right? And he impresses the crowd. And he says, okay, I've been sent to you. The local osa osu mofis ma'amino moshehu navi. The Rambam says, obviously, right, just because you could do tricks, right, like David Copperfield, doesn't mean that you're a navi, right? We have mentalists, right? That's a very popular thing now, right? People who could guess your birthday and tell you all kind of stuff that you never knew, right? So there are people who are mind readers and magicians, right? There are a dime a dozen today. So the Rambam says just because you could do that doesn't mean that you're qualified to be a navi. So the big key to this is as follows: Ela Adam Shahainu Yodinbo Mitchilaso Shehu Ra'il Nevuah B'Chachmaso Ubemaisav. So this person, he just can't come up out of the blue, right? He has to have a reputation. He has to have a reputation as being a good guy and someone well known in his wisdom and his good deeds. Shenis ala behen al kol b'nei gilo. Everyone knows about him. Everyone his age knows about him. V'haya mahalach b'darchei hanavua b'kedushaso u'b'pirushaso. And everyone know that he's a special guy. Okay, so after he has a reputation, everyone knows who he is. Then one day he says, okay, I've been sent, and here is my os and my mofes. This is how I'm going to prove to you, right? And he does a trick. The Amar Shaha'el Shlacho mitzvah lishmoa mimenu shenemar elav tishmaun. Okay, you have a mitzvah that you have to listen to him, even though you may be skeptical and you may think, well, okay, there are a lot of magicians and we don't really know, but you have to listen to him even if you're not 100% sure. The efsher sheyase oso mofes ve'eno navi. But then again, the Rambam says you could do tricks. That doesn't necessarily mean you're a navi. V'zeh ha'os yesh lo dvarim bego. And sometimes the Rambam says that that you could be a navi, right? If you follow, excuse me, where did I go? And sometimes there could be other reasons why this os would work. The afal piken mitzvah lishmolo hol the adam gadol v'chacham b'royal nevuah mambino so el chaskaso. So Rambam says this comes down to something very simple. You're right. We don't know who's telling the truth, who's not telling the truth, but there's what we call a chazaka. A chazaka, the Rambam says, that if a person who has a reputation, again, he just didn't land here and we have no idea where he comes from. If a person has a reputation as being scholarly and on a certain level, and then one day he appears to be a navi, he has what we call a cheskas kashrus. Okay, shakach needs tavinu, kumo shenetz tavinu lachto chesadin al pishnei edim ksherim. The Rambam makes a unbelievable comparison, right? You wouldn't believe it if you didn't see it. Says the Rambam, the reason why we believe a navi is no different than the reason why we believe two Edim. Two Edim come into Bezdin and say, this woman is married. This woman isn't married. This is a Kohen. This is that. We saw this person. We saw Reuven kill Shimon, right? We've learned so much Gemara to date. We all know that this is a principle that we don't understand why. It is possible that two people could concoct a story, but nevertheless, the Torah grants people what we call the chazaka. Until proven a liar, you have a chazaka, what we call a cheskes kashrus, and just like two edim are believed, and so the Rambam says v'afal pi she'efshe shahidu b'sheker, hol uksherim hem etzleinu ma'amidin oso al kashrusan. The cheskes kashrus, we are innocent until proven guilty. That's the American way of saying this, right? You're innocent until proven guilty. So two people come into Bezdin and say Reuven killed Shimon. We don't ask. Well, we eventually ask questions, but if they could prove that, if after all the drisha and the chakira and everything else, we find no reason why they're lying, we believe them. So too, this Navi has his own cheskes kashrus. And in a similar matter, says the Rambam, the pasuk says at the end in the Tzavim, it says Hanistaros Hashem Elokeinu. God knows the secrets, but we know what is right. We know what is revealed to us. That's to us, but the secrets is only for God. Right? Benemar, and it says Ki Adam Yura Le'inayim, right? It says in Shmuel that a person sees what's visible in the eyes, V'Hashem Yireh Le'levav, but only God sees inside. We see outside and God sees inside. Right? So too the Navi. We can't read his mind, just like we can't read the Adam's mind, whether they're telling the truth or not. They're presumed to be kosher until proven otherwise. Only God knows the truth. So we can't act like God and say, oh, well, maybe we don't believe them. We were granted the right to assume that they are telling the truth. Even if they're not telling the truth, then it's almost a case of, fool me once, shame on you, right? There's nothing I could do about it, right? You're the loser. So too, the same rule applies to the Navi, that the Navi is presumed kosher until he isn't. And the Rambam says that, we can't know what the truth is. Only God knows what the truth is. And that's how he ends the 7th parak.